On January 7, 1942, Adolf Hitler sat at his headquarters in East Prussia and delivered a verdict on America that would seal Germany's fate. He told his inner circle that he did not see much future for the Americans. It was a decayed country, he said. They had their racial problem and the problem of social inequalities. Everything about the behavior of American society revealed that it was half Judaized and the other half negrified. How could one expect a state like that to hold together? 7,000 miles away, in a small shipyard office in Richmond, California, a 57-year-old industrialist named Henry Kaiser was sketching something on a piece of hotel notepaper. He had never built a ship in his life. He had built dams, roads, and bridges, but ships were different. Ships were complicated. The established shipbuilders said it took 8 months to build a cargo vessel. Kaiser looked at the sketch he had drawn and told his team they would build one in 4 days. Hitler believed the Americans were soft. Kaiser was about to prove him catastrophically wrong. The misjudgment began long before the first shot was fired. In the years leading up to war, German military intelligence compiled reports on American industrial capacity, military readiness, and national character. The conclusions were remarkably consistent. America was a nation of businessmen and consumers, not warriors. Its army ranked among the smallest in the world in 1939, smaller than Portugal's. Its factories made automobiles and refrigerators, not tanks and aircraft. Its people had grown comfortable during the long peace and had no appetite for sacrifice. Hitler's advisors told him that American war production claims were propaganda. When President Franklin Roosevelt announced in May 1940 that the United States would produce 50,000 aircraft per year, the German High Command dismissed it as fantasy. In 1939, American military aircraft production had been fewer than 3,000 planes total. The idea that this could increase by a factor of nearly 20 seemed absurd. Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe and one of Hitler's closest confidants, shared his leader's contempt. Göring had built the German Air Force from nothing into the most feared military aviation force in Europe. He knew what it took to produce modern combat aircraft, the precision engineering, the specialized alloys, the trained workforce, the years of experience required to refine production methods. America had none of these advantages. The notion that they could conjure an air force out of automobile factories struck him as laughable. The German generals had fought Americans before. In the final year of the First World War, American troops had arrived in France and performed adequately, but they had entered late, suffered relatively light casualties compared to the European powers, and contributed little to the strategic direction of the war. The memory of those green doughboys reinforced the belief that Americans lacked the hardness required for sustained combat. Albert Speer, who would later become Hitler's Minister of Armaments, was present for many of his leaders' dinner conversations about America. Hitler believed the Americans had not played a very prominent part in the war of 1914 to 1918. They had not made great sacrifices of blood. They would certainly not withstand a trial by fire, for their fighting qualities were low. In general, Hitler said, no such thing as an American people existed as a unit. They were nothing but a mass of immigrants from many nations and many races. This racial analysis was central to Hitler's worldview. He believed that national strength flowed from racial purity and homogeneity. Germany, with its supposed Aryan bloodline, possessed an inherent superiority that would manifest on the battlefield. America, a mongrel nation of immigrants, Jews, and African Americans, could not possibly match the martial spirit of the German Volk. But the German analysis contained a fatal flaw. They measured American potential by American performance in peacetime. They saw a nation that had not mobilized and concluded it could not mobilize. They saw factories making consumer goods and assumed those factories could not make weapons. They saw a diverse population and believed diversity meant weakness. They were wrong about everything. The transformation began before America officially entered the war. In the summer of 1940, with France fallen and Britain under siege, Roosevelt challenged American industry to perform what he called a miracle of production. The automobile factories would stop making cars. The appliance plants would stop making refrigerators. Every lathe, every press, every assembly line in America would be converted to war production. This was not merely a call to action, it was a fundamental restructuring of the American economy. In 1941, more than 3 million automobiles rolled off American assembly lines. Over the next 4 years, only 139 more would be built. The entire capacity of the automotive industry was redirected to weapons production. Chrysler made fuselages. General Motors made airplane engines, guns, trucks, and tanks. Packard made Rolls-Royce engines for the British Air Force. Companies that had never made anything more dangerous than kitchen appliances learned to produce ammunition. The conversion happened with remarkable speed because American industry had capabilities the Germans never understood. The key was standardization and interchangeable parts. American factories had pioneered mass production techniques that allowed different facilities to manufacture components that fit together perfectly. A carburetor made in Ohio would fit an engine made in Michigan, would power a vehicle assembled in California. This system of interchangeable parts had been developed over decades for civilian production. Now it was applied to weapons of war. The skeptics said it could not be done. Aircraft were not automobiles. You could not stamp out a bomber the way you stamped out a Ford. The tolerances were too precise. The systems were too complex. A single heavy bomber had over 1 million parts. An automobile had 15,000. Henry Kaiser ignored the skeptics. In December 1940, he won a government contract to build 30 cargo ships for the British. He had no shipyard. He had no shipbuilding experience. He had no workers trained in maritime construction. What he had was a system. The system was the key. Kaiser did not think about shipbuilding the way traditional shipbuilders thought about it. He thought about it as a manufacturing problem. The specific product, whether it was a ship or a dam or a highway, was less important than the process. Every manufacturing process could be analyzed, broken into components, optimized, and scaled. Traditional shipbuilders accumulated knowledge through apprenticeship. A skilled riveter might spend years learning his trade. Kaiser did not have years. He had months, so he designed processes that could be learned in days. He substituted capital for labor wherever possible. He invested in machinery that would do work previously done by hand. The established shipbuilders said this approach would never work. Ships were too complex. The ocean was too unforgiving. Vessels built by amateurs would sink. Kaiser proved them wrong. His ships were not only built faster than traditional vessels, they were built better. The defect rate at Kaiser's yards was less than half the defect rate at conventional shipyards. The same systematic approach that accelerated production also improved quality. Kaiser applied the same principles that had built the Hoover Dam ahead of schedule. He broke the shipbuilding process into modules. Instead of constructing a ship from the keel up on a single slipway, he prefabricated entire sections in different locations and assembled them like building blocks. He used welding instead of riveting, which was faster and required less skilled labor. He recruited workers from across the country, built housing for them, established childcare centers for their children, and created a healthcare system to keep them healthy and productive. The transformation of ordinary Americans into shipbuilders happened at a pace that defied conventional wisdom. Men and women who had never seen the ocean, who had never held a welding torch, who had never set foot in an industrial facility, learned to build ships in weeks. Kaiser's training programs were ruthlessly efficient. A new worker could become a competent welder in 10 days. In 30 days, they could be productive members of a shipbuilding team. The workers came from everywhere. Farmers from Oklahoma who had lost their land to drought, factory workers from Detroit laid off during the Depression, women who had never worked outside the home, African Americans seeking opportunity denied them in the segregated South. The workforce at Kaiser's Richmond yards eventually peaked at over 90,000 people, and nearly a third of them were women. The women who worked in these factories became symbols of American wartime mobilization. They drilled rivets, welded seams, and installed wiring, doing work that had been exclusively male before the war. The government promoted their contributions through posters and films featuring strong, determined women in factory settings. These images became iconic representations of the home front effort. There were thousands of women like this across America, working in shipyards and aircraft plants, proving that the workforce could expand in ways German planners never anticipated. The established shipbuilders watched in disbelief. They had been building ships the same way for decades. They knew what was possible. Kaiser's methods violated every principle of their craft. Ships were supposed to be riveted, not welded. Construction was supposed to happen on the slipway, not in scattered fabrication shops. Workers were supposed to be trained over years, not weeks. But Kaiser's methods worked. In 1941, the average time to build a Liberty ship, the standard cargo vessel of the war, was 230 days. By 1942, Kaiser's yards had reduced that to 45 days, then 30 days, then 20 days. In November 1942, Kaiser's Richmond shipyard built the Liberty ship Robert E. Peary in 4 days and 15.5 hours. From laying the keel to launching the completed vessel took less time than a German U-boat needed to cross the Atlantic. The Germans now faced a strategic crisis they had not anticipated. Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of Germany's U-boat fleet, had staked his strategy on a simple calculation. His submarines would sink Allied shipping faster than the Allies could replace it. In the early months of 1942, this strategy appeared to be working. German U-boats prowled the American East Coast during what they called the Second Happy Time, sinking hundreds of merchant ships within sight of shore. Oil tankers burned off the coast of Florida. Cargo vessels went down within view of New Jersey beaches. Reinhard Hardigan, commander of U-123, was among the first U-boat captains to hunt American waters. In January 1942, he torpedoed ships so close to shore that he could see the glow of city lights reflected off the smoke. The Americans had not implemented blackout procedures. They had not organized convoys. They seemed almost to be inviting attack. Hardigan sank 8 ships on his first patrol and returned to Germany a hero. Other U-boat commanders followed. Through the first 6 months of 1942, German submarines sank nearly 400 ships in American coastal waters. The losses were catastrophic. Oil that should have fueled Allied tanks pooled on Atlantic beaches. Food that should have fed British civilians rotted at the bottom of the sea. Strategic materials essential to the war effort vanished beneath the waves. Donitz believed he was winning. His submarines were inflicting damage at a rate that exceeded his most optimistic projections. If these losses continued, Britain would be strangled. The American war effort would collapse before it could fully mobilize. But even as the U-boats chalked up kills, the shipyards were accelerating. In 1942, American shipyards launched 8 million tons of new shipping. In 1943, they launched 19 million tons. By the fall of 1943, new construction exceeded losses for the first time. Every ship the U-boat sank was replaced by 2 more. Donitz watched the numbers with growing alarm. His submarines were sinking ships at a rate that would have won the First World War. But this was not the First World War. This was a conflict against an enemy whose industrial capacity defied comprehension. The math was merciless. Donitz calculated that his U-boats needed to sink 700,000 tons of shipping per month to strangle Britain. In 1942, they came close. But by 1943, American shipyards alone were launching more than 1 million tons per month. The target kept moving, always receding, always beyond reach. Worse, the Americans were learning. The early disasters off the East Coast had exposed failures in anti-submarine warfare. Convoys were organized. Aircraft were deployed to patrol the shipping lanes. New technologies like radar and improved sonar gave the defenders advantages they had lacked. In May 1943, Donitz was forced to withdraw his U-boats from the Atlantic. In a single month, 43 submarines had been lost. The tonnage they sank no longer justified the casualties they suffered. The Battle of the Atlantic, which Germany needed to win to strangle Britain, was lost. The U-boat crews who survived the May disaster returned to occupied France in shock. They had gone to sea believing they were winning. They came back to port understanding they had lost. The endless convoys they had hunted now sailed with escorts they could not penetrate. The Allied aircraft that had once been rare now seemed to be everywhere. The technological superiority that German submarines had enjoyed was gone. What happened at sea was replicated in the air. Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant outside Detroit became the symbol of American industrial might. Designed by famed industrial architect Albert Kahn, the facility covered 3.5 million square feet making it the largest factory under one roof anywhere in the world. Its purpose was to mass-produce the B-24 Liberator, a 4-engine heavy bomber, more complex than anything Ford had ever manufactured. The challenges were immense. The B-24 had over 1 million parts and more than 300,000 rivets in 550 different sizes. It required precision engineering that the automobile industry had never attempted. Ford's production chief, Charles Sorensen, studied the aircraft manufacturer Consolidated's methods and found them primitive. Bombers were being assembled outdoors, by hand, using techniques that had not changed in decades. Sorensen proposed something revolutionary. He would build bombers on a moving assembly line, just like automobiles. Critics called the idea insane. Dutch Kindleberger, president of North American Aviation, scoffed that you could not expect a blacksmith to make a watch overnight. The skepticism was not unreasonable. Aircraft manufacturing was fundamentally different from automobile production. A car could have minor variations and still function perfectly. An aircraft with minor variations might fall out of the sky. The tolerances were measured in thousandths of an inch. The materials were exotic alloys that behaved differently than automotive steel. The systems, hydraulics, electrical, pneumatic, had to work in perfect harmony at 25,000 feet in sub-zero temperatures. Ford struggled initially. The government kept changing the aircraft's design, which disrupted the assembly line. Workers had to learn entirely new skills. The press mocked the facility as Will It Run instead of Willow Run. Senator Harry Truman investigated the delays and publicly questioned whether Ford could deliver on its promises. The problems were real. Consolidated Aircraft, which had designed the B-24, kept making modifications based on combat experience. Every change required Ford to retool its assembly line. Dies that had cost thousands of dollars became obsolete overnight. Workers who had mastered one process had to be retrained for another. Ford's response was characteristically stubborn. The company assigned 200 engineers to work around the clock, converting Consolidated's hand-drawn sketches into precise manufacturing specifications. They produced 5 miles of technical drawings per day. When Consolidated's modifications made drawings obsolete before they could be implemented, Ford engineers started over without complaint. The company also decentralized production. Instead of building entire aircraft at Willow Run, Ford created a network of subcontractors who manufactured components that were then shipped to the main plant for final assembly. Engines came from Buick in Flint. Propellers came from Hamilton Standard in Connecticut. Landing gear came from Goodyear in Ohio. The logistics alone would have been impossible for any organization that had not spent decades mastering supply chain management. By 1944, the problems were solved. Willow Run produced one B-24 every 63 minutes. At peak production in April 1944, the plant turned out 453 bombers in a single month. Between April 24 and April 26 of that year, 100 completed bombers flew away from Willow Run in just 72 hours. The workers operated in 2 9-hour shifts, 6 days a week. The remaining 6 hours each day were used to restock parts, perform maintenance, and change tooling. Even with this relentless schedule, the workforce was reduced from 42,000 to 17,000 as efficiency improved. The same number of bombers required fewer and fewer workers to produce. The Army Air Forces eventually had to tell Ford to slow down. They had no place to park all the aircraft. Storage areas at training bases overflowed with B-24s waiting for crew.